All right, we are wrapping up our Ten Commandment series. We're in the third part. We're looking at the New Testament's connection to the Ten Commandments. So let's dig in and wrap up this series.
Yes, let's do this. We're going to talk about Jesus and his thoughts about the Ten Commandments. So I'm going to start by reading you a verse.
Okay.
And you tell me what you hear as it relates to what we've talked about beforehand.
Okay, it's a lot of pressure.
John 12, yeah, John 12:45 says this: "He who sees me sees the one who sent me." What do you hear in that?
And this is Jesus speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I hear Jesus saying that he is the representation. He's representing.
He is doing the second commandment. He is
bearing the name of God.
That's right. He is the visual representation of bearing God's name. Yeah, so he's essentially, right, showing Israel how this should be done. This is how you represent God's name.
Because they got it wrong.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
In more than one way.
Yes. Right. So that's kind of how Jesus sees himself as it relates to the commandments. Okay. Got it? So far.
Got it.
So then we jump into Matthew. Matthew 5 is the Sermon on the Mount. It starts with the Beatitudes.
Yeah,
but
super
then,
famous.
Right. He jumps into, guess what? The commandments.
Okay.
The things that we've been talking about.
Probably important.
That's very important. And what he's doing is he is going to talk about how these commandments matter, right?
Yeah.
And that he kind of raises the bar on what it means, and guess what it's all about?
The heart.
Yes, it starts with the heart and then moves into action.
Action.
Yeah. So here's another question.
Okay.
Why do you think the commandments are important to Jesus, and why is he calling them back to the commandments?
Well, he's probably calling them back to the commandments because they didn't fulfill them in the first place.
That's right. And guess what they did really bad? They were unfaithful. They didn't worship God.
They didn't worship God and God alone.
Yeah,
and they did not bear his name out to the nations.
That's right. And so that's what he's calling them back to this. It was very important then, and it was very important now.
And it's still important today.
It's still important today. So for Jesus, these commandments are about being obedient. It's about doing God's will.
Okay.
Right? When you do God's will, guess what you are?
An image bearer.
Yes. And for Jesus, that's the true identity marker of
a believer.
Of a believer, yeah. This new covenant member is image bearer.
Image bearer.
Yeah. And that's it. That's how Jesus brings new life into these covenants.
That's so amazing.
No, commandments, not covenants, commandments. And that's what he's doing. That's how he's tying it in. So that's kind of what Jesus is doing there. And it's fascinating because later on in Matthew 7, he talks about, I think essentially why this is important is because if there's no action, right? If it's all word and there's no action, for Jesus, guess what that is?
It's lip service.
Yeah, and guess what? It's bearing God's name in vain. It's the whole thing we talked about.
Yeah, what's the verse say? Jesus, Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus, I did all these things, and Jesus says,
turn away from me, I don't know you.
Right. So yeah, for Jesus, it's lip service. You can't just say the name and nothing behind it. There has to be heart and action.
Action.
And that...
You have to worship God and God alone, and you have to bear his name well.
Right.
You can't just bear his name well on Sunday. Or, or proclaim to be a believer on Sunday, or on Wednesday, or on Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then turn around and not bear his name well to your family, or whatever that looks like. Mm-hmm. You have to bear his name well and worship him and him alone 100% of the time.
Which is hard.
It's very hard.
But I think, and we've talked about this before, I think as a believer, you have to make the decision eventually how you're going to represent Jesus well all the time.
Yeah, that should always be in your mind, in the back of your mind. Because obviously we're not perfect. We've experienced that ourselves multiple times in marriage, as parents. When this old house that we bought is falling apart, we've not always been fantastic image bearers in the process.
I just messed up 20 minutes ago, so yes, I did not represent God well in a conversation. But I'm conscious of that, and it's always good when you have someone else that can remind you, oh, hey, wait a minute, remember who you
are and who you say that you worship and follow.
Right.
And are you bearing God's name through that process? I think this, as believers, that's something that we have to continually think about. The actions, the words coming out of your mouth. Are you bearing God's name
Yeah.
well?
That's the whole idea of what Jesus is talking about.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
That's really cool.
Here's something really fascinating. Next time we do this, Miss Morgan, is going to lead a word study.
Yeah, we're going to start a word study series.
Yep.
And we're going to start with the word Shema.
Yes.
Which is so fascinating. I'm not going to tell you what it means today. You have to watch the next video to hear it, but it's really cool. Just the connections of the Shema surrounding the Ten Commandments. Not something I knew until I started researching it. Just really love how the Bible works and how everything's interconnected. The Bible is really cool. And the biblical authors are really amazing.
Ninjas.
Yeah.
Yep. It's going to be fascinating. So please tune in. You're going to learn a lot, and it's going to connect the dots on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah,
so.
and it's also going to help you better understand how to be an image bearer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So stick around for that. If you have any Hebrew words, I guess, or Greek words too.
Oh, yeah, we can do both.
I love the Old Testament so much.
Yeah,
but if you have any Hebrew or Greek words that you would like us to go over in this word series, we are still pondering and praying about which words to go over. So feel free to comment, message us, email us, whatever. And we will see you next time.